Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by Data for Impact. I'm Tori Taylor, one of the project's technical directors and part of the team that implemented the work that we're going to be talking about today. To save bandwidth, most of us are going to come on camera just to say hello when we first start speaking, and then we'll turn off our video. During this session, we'll be introducing you to the Private Sector Engagement Self-Assessment Monitoring Tool, or PSE-SAM. The tool is a new online resource designed for USAID, its partners in the private sector, and others working with them on approaches that leverage private enterprise to support development outcomes. Next slide, please. Please note that today's session will be recorded. The slides in the recording will be emailed to registrants and posted on Data for Impact's website and YouTube channel after the session. If you don't wish to be recorded or have content attributed to your name on the record, just stay muted, keep your camera off, and don't enter comments in the chat. We'll stop recording during the Q&A session. Next, please. The webinar will be presented in English, but we have closed captioning available too. To turn the captions on, click the icon with the 2 C's at the bottom of the Zoom screen. If you want to hide the captions later, click the same icon and choose Hide Subtitle from the menu that appears. Captions are generated using an automatic Zoom feature, so they might not be 100% accurate. During the webinar, feel free to ask questions using the Q&A function. Please do not add your questions to the chat so they don't get lost. We'll do our best to answer all your questions at the end of the webinar, and we do have an hour and a half for today's session, so we should have plenty of time. Next slide, please. To start, I wanted to share just a little bit about Data for Impact, or D4I. D4I is funded by USAID and implemented by a consortium led by the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in partnership with Palladium, ICF, JSI, and Tulane University. We work to strengthen local capacity to generate and use high-quality data for strategic decision-making on health policy and programs. The project evaluates programs' effectiveness, integrates gender into all of its activities, supports adaptive management, and helps learn from evidence. We draw on the technical expertise in each consortium member organization, plus an extensive network of local and regional subpartners and experts around the world. Next, please. Related to that, I just wanted to draw your attention to some resources available online from our just completed webinar series on localization in monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning, or MERL. USAID's private sector engagement policy emphasizes the crucial role that local private sector actors play in sustainable development. A systems approach and a focus on equity and partnerships are among the many shared elements of localization and PSE, or private sector engagement. The 5 webinars in our series featured local and regional actors and their international collaborators discussing topics such as effective capacity action planning, understanding complex program systems, and elevating community voices. You can find more information on D4I's website under resources. We'll put this link and a few others in the chat. Next slide, please. Now for an overview of today's webinar. First, we have Susan Ross, Senior Private Sector Engagement Advisor in the Office of Maternal and Child Health and Nutrition at USAID's Bureau for Global Health. Susan will provide opening remarks. Next, Cindy Cizik, Senior Technical Advisor for Private Sector in Palladium's Global Health Portfolio, will talk about the process of developing our original paper-based PSE-SAM tool. I'll share information about the tool's pilot exercise conducted with missions and partners in 2 countries, and Seth Setiada, a web-based application engineer with UNC, will demonstrate the use of the online tool. After that, as noted, we'll have open Q&A. Next slide, please. And Susan, over to you.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you today. I hope everyone can hear me. So I think many people know that USAID has a long history of working with the private sector, and we launched our private sector policy in 2018. And so we're really trying to embrace the power of the market, and we use market-based solutions to be able to address our development challenges across all of the different sectors that we work in, including global health. Next slide, please. And so the idea of one of the main things that is in the private sector evidence and learning plan is really about how do we do private sector engagement better. And we've been doing work, and there's various resources and research that's been done by a project called Laser Pulse that is created this framework that Tori will talk about called the perceived worth of continued engagement. And we use that research to actually move the research into action to create this private sector engagement self-assessment tool. We field tested this in Tanzania and the Philippines, which will be sharing the data today. And then one of the main recommendations out of that field testing was that they really wanted to have the data automated so that it would be easier for them to visualize and be able to act on. Next slide, please. And I think I'm handing it over to Cindy. Yes.
Yes.
Cindy.
Thank you so much, Susan. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Cindy Cizik. I'm a Senior Technical Advisor for Palladium's Global Health Practice. As Susan mentioned, the PSE process analysis conducted by Laser Pulse examine the life cycle of a variety of different types of partnerships, their operationalization models, their bottlenecks, and then the root causes of those bottlenecks. And based on that research, they developed the PWSE framework that identifies 7 different partnership factors that will likely influence the partner's perceived worth of continued engagement, or PWCE as the acronym. And obviously, these factors may change over time as the partnerships develop. And the more positive the experience, the more likely partners are to stay engaged. So the 7 PWCE factors include emotional effects. So what kind of energy or enthusiasm is there about the partnership? The rate of progress, the perceived consequences of market impact, the performative capacity of the partners to meet the goal of the partnership, the operational alignment between partners, how is the relationship being managed, and finally, what is the value proposition? So the PwC framework breaks down each of these 7 factors into additional key elements or items that ultimately influence the perception of how the partnership is going. And the PSE-SAM tool is largely aligned to those items. So next slide, please. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera. So what is the PSE-SAM tool? It was designed as a practical tool that consists of a short self-administered survey that missions, their PSE partners, and other collaborating organizations can complete, either using a designated representative or a group consensus to decide on responses. The survey items are brief statements describing positive engagement, which participants respond to using a 5-point agree or disagree response scale that also includes a neutral option. And so essentially, the survey provides a structure for assessing an individual partnership across the PWCE factors and potentially identifying areas for improvement. Again, recognizing that the partnership and partner perspectives will likely evolve or change over time. And then reviewing these results can help partners quickly identify areas of poor alignment or limited progress that may need attention going forward. And the results are not intended really for a comparison across different partnerships, nor for any kind of quantitative assessment. And they should not really be used that way. So the goal of the PSE-SAM tool is basically to learn and adapt the partnership as it evolves. Next slide, please. So here's a screenshot of the paper-based tool. In its first iteration, it was developed for use as a manual tool that could be completed and printed and completed by hand. So the tool also includes guidance or tips on how to facilitate use of the tool amongst the partners, including instructions for collating and analyzing the results and how to conduct those participatory results review meetings. And the paper-based tool and guidance are available on D4I's website, so we'll drop that link into the chat as well. Next slide. So what does the tool cover? Here's a summary of the factors, the number of items or statements that are included in the tool, and the maximum positive scores or strengths and negative scores or risks. So for example, emotional effects capture the overall enthusiasm or satisfaction of the partners toward the partnership. The rate of progress captures the pace of milestones and or outputs. Market consequent items or statements focus on the partner's perspective on how the partnership is benefiting overall market share, financial impact, or even social impact. Performative capacity is about the partners assessing their organization's ability to meet commitments, internal capacity, and ability to adapt to change. Operational alignment is related to how organizational cultures or pace of operations or accountability align amongst the partners. And relationship management captures whether or not there is a perception of clear roles and responsibilities, good communication, and transparency. And then finally, the value proposition is essentially the what's in it for me and how is the organization benefiting? Is it access to new content, contacts, networks, funding, reputation, etc. So finally, next slide. Here are just a couple examples of the items or statements that are included in the tool. So for example, for rate of progress, the statement reads, milestones for this engagement or crucial steps in the process of working together are being reached at a good pace. And as described previously, participants can assess whether or not this is a strength or potential risk. For performative capacity, one of the statements is our organization has sufficient financial resources to meet its relevant commitments to this engagement. For relationship management, when difficulties arise, the organizations in this engagement are able to work through them and find a mutually agreeable solution. And then finally, an example for value proposition. Participation in this engagement has improved our reputation or legitimacy, or it probably will in the future. So to see all of the various items and statements that are included in the tool, you can access the paper-based tool on the D4I website. Next slide, and over to you, Tori.
Thanks, Cindy. So D4I trained pilot participants, as I said, in 2 country settings to self-administer this tool. And they did that in 2 rounds that were approximately 6 months apart last year. Following that, we also provided data entry, analysis, results visualization, and basic interpretation after each round. And then we convened users in a results review meeting to talk about the findings and obtain feedback from them about how acceptable and relevant this tool was to their work and collaboration. After that, we made minor revisions to the paper-based tool based on the feedback that they provided. Next, please. I want to talk a little bit about how the responses are scored. It's pretty straightforward, but it's a little tough to explain. A strength score and a risk score are calculated on each factor. Recall that there are 7 factors labeled A through G here. The scoring is based on a point system, so every strongly agree response adds 2 points to a strength score, and every agree response adds 1 point. Similarly, the risk score gains 2 points for each strongly disagree and 1 for each disagree. The total scores are then divided by the maximum possible number of points, and that maximum doesn't include points for items marked as not applicable. We felt like calculating 2 scores for each factor helped avoid the averaging out of extreme responses and give users information about where they could focus their efforts to strengthen the engagement, even in the absence of risks. The scores are rough proxies reflecting diverse experiences, and the PSA-SAM is a learning tool meant to offer a tangible starting point for partners' discussions about how the engagement is going and how they might improve it on factors that are both evidence-based and historically under-examined. Next, please. In addition to calculating the factor level summary scores I just described to share with pilot users, we tested a few options with pilot groups for visualizing results on the underlying items. We had things like stacked bar charts and icon sets in early meetings. Shaded matrices, or the simplified kind of heat maps that you see here, were preferred by pilot participants. The digital tool that we created after the pilot and that Seth will demonstrate generates these matrices automatically. Each column represents one organization. Each row represents an item from the tool. Responses are shown using the colors from the legend here. Respondents stay in the same column in every matrix for that round of results, so that during the results review, users can quickly tell if risks, for example, are distributed or concentrated by team and or organization. Next, I'm going to walk you through some of the pilot results. These are just from one of the participating country groups, and I'm using that set because there was a larger number of participating organizations, so there's a little more to look at. Next, please. So the first three factors on the tool, emotional effects, rate of progress, and market consequences, comprise just 2 items each. And again, that's directly aligned with the PwC framework and its subcomponents. Glancing at these results, you can see there's very little red, so very few risks, and some scattered neutral values for enthusiasm and commitment at baseline. The follow-up round showed that strength scores for market consequences had increased markedly from 48% of the maximum at baseline to 70%. But when we talked with the pilot participants during the results review meeting, it turned out that the lower initial score was mainly the result of misunderstanding early on about when they should be marking an item as not applicable. Next slide, please. So performative capacity was interesting. The strength score went down between rounds from 65% to 56%, and the risk score grew from 2 to 10%. Organizations reporting negative or neutral results on any given item tended to report them on other items as well. And for this PSE, performative capacity really emerged as the most crucial area for potential improvement. Next slide. Operational alignment improved moderately across rounds for this group. Limited ability to adapt to resource delays and misalignment in the pace of operations was there consistently for a few members. You can see that's the scattered red. Next slide, please. For this PSE, risks related to relationship management essentially disappeared over time. And they saw an increase in strengths relative to the maximum possible score, especially in the areas of communication, shared decision-making, informed decision-making, and record sharing. Next, please. Improvements in participants' ratings on items related to new funding, business resources, and policy influence under the value proposition factor helped the value proposition strength score increase for this group from 60% to 68% across rounds. So again, just a slight or moderate improvement. Next, please. So those are all the PwC factors scores for this group over the 2 rounds in the pilot. And one high-level takeaway was the need to discuss terms and concepts in the tool with participants beforehand and ensure a common understanding, including about when an item might be relevant or not relevant, and when the same term might legitimately mean something slightly different for different participants. The term market share is one example of that. For this group of co-engaged organizations, there was clear improvement over time on every factor except performative capacity, as I mentioned before. Since different organizations take part in different rounds typically, and that was true here as well, results should be interpreted with those changes in mind. I also wanted to note that participants are naturally going to be interested in disaggregating the results further. There was a lot of talk about showing these by the type of organization or other factors, characteristics among participants. And people wanted to know who said what, especially when a problem surfaced. Overall, instead, we encourage groups using the tool to consider how they can adapt their practices and interactions to improve their collaboration more holistically in response to findings. But in some groups, there might be a level of trust such that people are willing to talk about even risks that surfaced that may have emanated from their group during results review transparently and openly. Next slide, please. Overall, the pilot helped us confirm the need for tools to help missions and partners monitor the process of engagement. Pilot participants thought this tool was easy to use, and they said that it helped them think and talk about important relational factors that they hadn't really previously considered directly and probably wouldn't have without the tool. On the D4I side, pilot users were really essential to helping us fine-tune the tool, the results visualization, and the guidance accompanying it. The pilot also clarified for us that even with the really small group of participating organizations, the effort that was involved in compiling findings for review was seriously going to limit tool uptake without further support on our side. So that's where USAID came in with additional support, and we started the process of developing this digital online version. Now I'm going to hand things over now to Seth to talk about that process and lead a demonstration of the online tool. Next, please.
Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. First, we developed the user requirement specifications and the system interface specification to get the digitization process. And what we do next is that the pilot participants were invited to test a beta version of the tool on the project website. These test users provided feedback on specific aspects of the tool and user experience, and we use their feedback to find the tool, and a help desk or other user support may be in the works for later this year. We also put the link to the digital tool in the chat. Next slide, please. So now it's time to move on to demonstration while I am changing to sharing my screen. There you go. I hope everyone can see. And I will turn off my video. So I'm so excited to introduce the PSE-SAM digital tool. Now let's dive into the demonstration. So first, let's take a look at the landing page. This is the initial page where user began their journey with the PSE-SAM tool. It provides an overview of the tool and its purpose. And to access this website, let me click this one. We can enter your login credentials. So I'm going to use my demo account. And if you don't have an account, you can easily create one by clicking on the register link on the top right corner over here. Let me show you quick. So the form is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And for this demonstration, I will not create a new account. And once you create your account, the system will redirect you to the main dashboard. It's going to be the same as we see here. So once you sign in, you'll be directed to the main dashboard. So this is the main dashboard. It provides a quick overview of your PSE-SAM groups you coordinate and you're affiliate with, if you have the data, as well as notification if you're invited to take part of the PSE-SAM, as we can see here on the top green background here. And it will give you the link to which will redirect you to the PSE-SAM, and you can start filling the data. So that's in general the how to navigate around. The next, what we're going to do is to initiate an assessment. We can go here to PSE-SAM page. So to initiate a PSE-SAM, we can click this button to create PSE-SAM. And before I start my demonstration that the PSE-SAM here, so PSE-Tool is designed to be used at organizational level. So the individuals that take part in this assessment are representing their organization. And to start this tool, someone needs to act as a coordinator or facilitator, or basically someone who will initiate the PSE-SAM and invites all affiliates to engage with the PSE-SAM. And for this demonstration, we will not be using real data, but rather hypothetical data to illustrate how the tool works. And for this demonstration, I will act as the facilitator who initiates the PSE-SAM. And this, as you can see, this is a very simple form. The very first text input will be the label for the PSE-SAM group. And let's say I will name it Global Health Consortium. And the description can be, let's say, partnerships with USAID, D4I, Palladium Group, and the cycle name. So what is the cycle name? So the cycle name has default the current, the month and the year, and you can change it. And so let's say for the whole 3 work years, we might want to say, okay, we can name it to project year 1 or project year 2, or maybe we can label it pre-orientation or post-implementation. So for the affiliates or partners, let's say we will invite Susan Ross at usaid.gov. After you type the email, you just need to press enter, and it will show up on the bottom of the text input, and we can add another partnership, another partners. For this demonstration, I will not save this form, but what will happen next is that we just need to click the save button, and all the data on this form will be saved, and all the affiliates, let's say we have another one, and the system will send all the affiliates an email notification and with a link on their email directly to the PSE-SAM. And for this demonstration, I will not save this one. Let's call. So after we save the PSE-SAM form that we just previously filled in, you will see the PSE-SAM on the left-hand side here. So this is already created before. I hope you please do not be confused with this. So it will show up here. As everyone can see, we have 2 tables here. The first one is all the PSE-SAM for the groups you coordinate, while on the right-hand side is for the PSE-SAM that you're affiliated. So if you're invited to take part of PSE-SAM, it will show up on the right-hand side table. So I think that's how to initiate the PSE-SAM. I think it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And what we're going to do next is to fill the PSE-SAM, to take part, to engage with the PSE-SAM. What we can do is that we see 4 icons here. We want to click the first one is to open PSE-SAM group. And as I already mentioned before, one PSE-SAM might have more than 1 cycle. If one PSE-SAM only have 1, you will be redirected directly to the form. Otherwise, like the example for this one, it has more than 1. Once you click it, and you need to choose which one you want to engage with. So let's take this one. Let's click this one. And for this demonstration as well, I already fill all the information. So there are like 2 parts. The first one is the background information, and the next one is all the 7 key factors. So we just need to fill all this form. Just already fill this one to make it fast for this demonstration. and I will take you guys to the end of this form. And as already explained before by Tori, we can see the score here. So the system will calculate your the score based on your answer. So we have free score, we have strengths, and we also can see the percentage here. And another thing while we are on this form is that you can navigate through the form to adjust your answers as needed, as long as you haven't submit your answers. And so for example, let's go back to the previous page, which is the value proposition. We have the risk score of 5, just to show the calculation. So that 5, that means the strongly disagree has 2 points. Let's move it to disagree, and it will reduce to 4, something like that. So the system will calculate automatically. And to submit your answers, you need to check this checkbox. The reason is that to prevent for you to, accidentally click these answers when you, let's say you haven't answered all the questions on the form. What we can, so to submit it, just check this one and click this button, and there you go. So that's pretty easy, and it is really adapted from based on the paper-based tool. So there's nothing surprising there. And what we're going to do next is that once you submitted your answer, you want to use the visualization feature. And to access that, we see the icon here on the second one to review your PSE-SAM result. And again, if the PSE-SAM only have 1 cycle, it will redirect you to the chart and heat map page. Otherwise, if it has more than 1 cycle, you can see options here. So the good thing about if you have multiple cycles is that you can compare them up to 6 cycles. And for this demonstration, I will try just to show you one first. Once you click it, you can see the answers here. You can see the chart here, how many people say the engagement, and we can see the partners by type. And so we have 2 tabs here. And the second one is for the heat map. So heat map is where we see the 7 key factors. And I would like to remind you again, it's just simple data, so it's not real data. And as you can see here, we can see the scores. We can see all the key factors. Now what I'm going to show you next is that to show multiple cycles here. And click start, and we can see more data here. And there you go. And the heat map, we will see, we can compare all the answers here to compare the scores here. So from point A to G, and I think this is very helpful tools to, overview the assessment framework. And I think that would be the end of the demonstration. I think I have one more to show is that if you coordinate a PSE-SAM, you can see 2 extra icons here. The first one is to delete it, and the other one to edit it. So what we can do at edit is that it will take you back to the form where you can add more people, or you can remove them, or you can delete the cycle. And another thing we can do here is that we can add cycle here too. And after that, we can just save it, and we can do another assessment. And I think that will be the end of the demonstration. Thank you for your attention, and I hope this presentation has given you a clear understanding of the tools, capabilities, and benefits, And if you have question or need further information, please do not hesitate to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth.
And
Seth,
tutorial.
thank you. Before you close out of the demo, I just want to ask if any participants have questions related to operating within this tool's digital environment, because Seth can keep that up on the screen for a moment if anyone needs something else demonstrated or we move through something too quickly. So let's just pause there, and please chime in the Q&A or the chat if you need to about any questions related to navigating the tool. And Matthew is reminding us in the chat that Zoom Q&A is the place for your questions. Thank you, Matthew. Okay, and if no questions specifically related to tool navigation that might benefit from having Seth keep that on the screen, then we can go ahead and move back, Matthew, to the slides for the Q&A.
Stop sharing.
I see we have one question in the Q&A, and it looks like maybe Susan's typing a response to that. That question is, how did partners react to their risk assessment? Did they generally have concern, agreement, disagreement? Yes, Susan, thank you. Susan has responded that generally they found it really useful and it helped them structure a discussion. We definitely found that to be true from the implementer side, from the D4I side. People did say, like I mentioned during the presentation, that they probably wouldn't have talked about these things or wouldn't have addressed them specifically. They might have talked generally about whether or not they were happy, but the breakdown by PwC factor and items within factors seemed to be really useful for sparking dialogue and structuring the conversation around those things. Susan, did you have anything to add, or anybody else on the team?
No, I think we have two other questions. Maybe the second, maybe you can take the bias and I can chime in on the qualitative aspects.
Sounds good. Thank you. So how do we manage biases that result from self-assessment subjectivity? That's a great question. This is obviously self-administered and it incorporates items, that people might interpret differently. One thing that is really important is making sure to discuss them before you engage in completing the tool so that there is at least common understanding about terms. We developed brief guidance to go along with the paper-based tool that is available online. The online tool links to it, and it's at the link that the paper-based tool is at on D4I's website. That's also in the chat. And in that guidance, we address this a little bit, the need to have the initial discussion to ensure common understanding of terms, and we propose some definitions for terms that are used in the tool, but that needs to be adapted to your context. And also the language. One thing I think we forgot to mention is that there's a language function at the top of the online tool. So that can be translated. The translation may not be perfect because it's an automatic function as well. The paper-based tool right now is available only in English, and the guidance too. But in terms of bias, I also commented in the chat that I really have come to see this as principally a tool for CLA, or what USAID terms collaboration, learning, and adapting. And that's because, as Susan has pointed out, it's meant to foster dialogue and to identify red flags in concepts that are going to remain a little bit nebulous because they're about relations. So I think that's just kind of an intrinsic part of the tool, and that we have to understand it not as generating like survey results or something where we're very concerned about validity and reliability, but more as a discussion tool and a process tool. So kind of embracing that inherent subjectivity, if that makes sense. Anyone have anything to add?
No, and I think just to build on that is that, a lot of these elements that are in the perceived worth of continued engagement come out of the research, right? The literature shows that partnerships, relationships are, built on trust, they're built on personal relationships. A lot of what makes partnerships work are these like soft, intangible things that are very hard to measure. because what does trust mean to me versus what does it mean to you? And so I think that's kind of the beauty of this tool, is that ultimately the partners are defining what these terms mean at the onset of the partnership. So we didn't necessarily go into this, but I think part of what we did this as research to test the efficiency or the feasibility and acceptability of the tool. And so we did it in a truncated period of time, right, with these 2 rounds, 6 months apart. I think where we've landed is that this would be something that would be a regular part of monitoring and a partnership or an engagement with a private sector partner, maybe once a year. So it's part of your kind of overall MEL plan. But I've facilitated a lot of partnerships, and people know things aren't going well, but they don't really know what's not going well. And I think one of the things that we found is that this is a structured way to kind of check in with all the different partners. Oftentimes smaller partners don't feel like they have the same voice at the table. And so it's a way for people to kind of check in and say, are we moving in the right direction? And if we're not, let's figure out what the issues are and why it's not working. And so I think that and people said that this tool is not only effective for private sector partners, but it could be very useful for local partners, for foundations. And so that idea that it's kind of a CLA. So Rebecca, I wonder if you could type more when you say a use case, because I mean, we see this as really, I will say that the Global Health Bureau did a review of 87 health partnerships. And when we asked people what indicators they use to assess the engagement, they basically said, well, we have the health outcome indicators. And this idea of like really monitoring and engagement in the private sector partnership world, we talk about this as relationship management, right? But we don't really have good indicators around relationship management. And so this was a way to really be able to have some structure and for the partners to decide, is the relationship working or is it not? And this is based on the laser pulse survey that actually found that there was a lot of private sector was either completely pulling out of partnerships or they were disengaging. And these were the factors that were either incentivizing them or disincentivizing them to continue to work with USAID. So maybe you can write more, Rebecca, if there's something else you mean by a use case. But I think that, this idea of how do we actually know if these relationships are working? And if they're not working, how do we get them back on track is really what we're trying to do. So we talk about this as looking at the process of engagement in private sector, not just the outcomes of what we get from working with the private sector. So I don't know if Tori or Cindy, you want to add anything.
Thanks, Susan. Rebecca, just to add in relation to your question, that the paper-based tool, to our knowledge, was only really used by pilot participants. If there was other uptake, we haven't been tracking it and we're not aware of it. We moved very quickly into the digitization support phase because, like I said, there was a lot of support required to help pilot participants work through the process. It's a straightforward calculation of results, but it's not the kind of thing that most people who are working on the project implementation side of things are going to have someone available to dedicate time to compiling forms from all the partners, using Excel or some manual version to come up with these scores in relation to a maximum and then putting them into the presentation format and leading the results review. So there wasn't like a gap between the two stages. It was, here's the paper-based tool. Okay, now we need a digital version to support uptake. So we moved straight into that, and that's where we're at this stage. Shanafi, I wanted to add to in relation to your questions that the brief guidance attached to the tool online is it includes questions to help structure the results review meeting amongst partners. So I think moving through those illustrative questions or other questions that the co-engaged organizations might have can help explore the results further too and understand why they look like they look, what is, like you say, contributing to the risks that we see.
Tori, do you want to take the question from Amanda?
Yes, so let me read Amanda's question. Risk scores appeared to be quite low in the examples given. Is this expected? Or was there a tendency for responses to be more positive than expected? I think it was expected. We had obviously been engaging with the pilot participant groups ahead of time to explain what we were doing, to ascertain their interest in working with us on this, thinking about just which partnerships would be good ones to involve in a pilot. And Susan assisted us with that. And Susan has always said she wanted to identify pilot participant groups that had a sort of a strong engagement, at least anecdotally anyway, because we knew that, we were going to ask them to use this as a way for us to learn about the process, not just as a way for them to learn more about strengths and risks in their engagement. So we kind of knew up front that there were, quote, good or strong engagements present to begin with. So that was part of it. Also, I think we talked a lot about kind of response bias in this process and the power dynamic when you have USAID engaging on equal footing with other, what I call the co-engaged organizations, so the private sector partners and potentially others involved in working together on these projects. So, I thought people might be hesitant to come out and say, well, this isn't going well, this is a problem. And I think that probably was to a limited extent present and unavoidable. It might be more present with groups that are not chosen to participate in the pilot on the basis of a strong existing partnership, if that makes sense, even. Just because, that we're asking people to sit down with USAID president and say, this is not going well, this is a problem. And I think that's always difficult. But all we can do is try to make that easier. And I hope that this tool is something that can do that. Other
And
comments?
I think the other country that we didn't present because it only had USAID and one other partner has been going for a very long time, and they see it as a very, very good partnership. And even they found areas that they could improve. So they didn't really have risk, but they actually scored a little lower than they thought they would in strengths. And it wasn't low, but they were like, oh, this tool even showed us that there might be ways that we could even strengthen this partnership that's going really well. So yeah, we did have some selection bias just because in order to get them to agree to do this, we had to have a partnership that was had been going for at least 2 years. They were at least in 2 different technical health areas, so there was some variability. And then there was a big difference in the size of the partnership or the number of partners. But I think that, it would be interesting to see if we do it in other partnerships. Obviously, the partners have to be willing to do it.
Thanks, Susan. And Amanda, as I alluded to when I was presenting slides, I was really intentional when we were thinking through how the scoring should be done and the strengths gaps or that difference between whatever your strength score is and 100%. I see that as the gap. Like that's an area for improvement, even as it's not identified as a risk per se. So no one disagreed with these positive statements, but if the strength score is not 100%, then there is room to improve. So hopefully that's helpful too. I'm also not sure if everyone caught that Seth mentioned that USAID is considering ongoing investment in supporting resources for users of this tool. So stay tuned, and we may have new future support such as a help desk or other things to help folks out if they choose to use the tool. Yeah, Susan, thank you for adding in the chat. We definitely want to hear more about people's experiences with the tool. Please contact D4I. If you use the tool, we are always looking to see how the products that we generate are being used. And I think actually with that, Matthew, if you'll turn to the acknowledgement slide, I want to make sure we give credit to USAID for its support of D4I. And thank everyone for joining the webinar. Just to reiterate, if you use this tool, we would really love to hear about it. And you can reach out to us at D4I unc.edu. I think I saw several folks on the call who know me from other work, so feel free to reach out to me directly as well, or to others on our presentation team. And if there are no other questions, I think we can end early. Thank you again, Seth, for the excellent demonstration, to USAID for the support, especially Susan, who's been instrumental throughout, to Cindy for being our best informed advisor on issues internally related to PSE, and to Matthew for administrative support. Thanks, everyone.